Two brothers trusted the wrong man deep in the wilderness. What followed was months of isolation, psychological control, and a disappearance that baffled search teams nationwide. When voices were finally heard in the forest, they weren't calling for help, and what rescuers found raised a terrifying question: why didn't they want to be saved? Two men went into the wilderness that morning believing they knew those mountains better than anyone else. They were experienced, prepared, confident, and by nightfall, they were gone. No struggle, no goodbye text, no signs they ever turned back. What started as a routine backcountry trek would unravel into one of the most disturbing missing persons cases in modern American history. A case where the truth was far worse than anyone imagined, and survival came at a psychological cost no one saw coming. Because 4 months later, when rescuers finally heard voices echoing through a remote stretch of forest, they weren't cries for help. They were whispers. Two names repeated over and over, coming from somewhere no human should have been able to survive. In this story, we'll uncover how trust became the weapon, how the wilderness became a prison, and how fear can convince the human mind to hide from rescue itself. But before we begin, I want to ask you something. If someone offered to guide you off a familiar trail, someone who looked official, knowledgeable, and safe, would you follow them? And if you survived, would you ever truly come back? Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because stories like this don't just ask what happened, they ask what you would have done. Now, let's begin. April 6, 2011 began quietly in Northern California, the kind of morning that tricks you into believing nothing bad can happen. The air over Trinity Alps wilderness was crisp, pine-scented, untouched by the heat that would arrive later in the day. Ethan Caldwell, 32, woke before his alarm in a rented cabin outside Weaverville. Former military, methodical by nature, he moved through his routine with calm precision, boots checked, map folded, satellite GPS clipped to his pack. This trip was supposed to be a reset. No noise, no deadlines, just mountains. Across the room, his younger brother Lucas Caldwell, 28, groaned and rolled onto his side. Lucas was the opposite. Impulsive, curious, the kind of man who trusted people easily and believed most situations worked themselves out. He joined the trip at the last minute, telling friends, "If I don't disappear into the woods now, I never will." They joked over instant coffee, teased each other about pace and stamina, and posed for a quick photo outside the cabin. Ethan posted it with a caption that would later circulate nationwide. "Off-grid for a few days. See you on the other side." At 8:41 a.m., they signed the trail register and stepped past the wooden marker reading, "Trinity Alps. Enter at your own risk." Neither man looked back. The first 2 hours on the trail passed without incident. The brothers moved in steady rhythm, boots biting into packed earth as towering pines swallowed the sound of the outside world. Snow still clung to the higher ridges, glittering through breaks in the canopy. Just past ridge marker 4, the trail narrowed into a rocky bend where visibility dropped sharply. That's where they saw him. He stood beside a weathered trail sign, studying a folded map like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Broad shoulders. Sun-worn skin. His clothes weren't new, but they were practical, government-issued looking. "Morning," the man said, stepping aside politely. "You two heading toward Sawtooth Pass?" Ethan nodded. "That's the plan." The man exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Wouldn't recommend it today. Snowmelt triggered a partial collapse overnight. I came through earlier. It's unstable." Lucas frowned. "There wasn't a closure notice." "Hasn't been updated yet," the man replied easily. "I used to survey trails for the state. Budget delays." He pointed west, off the marked route. "There's an older access line. Not public anymore, but it bypasses the slide and reconnects up ahead. Safer. Faster." Ethan hesitated. Protocol screamed against it. But the man's confidence felt earned, not forced. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Mark Halvorsen," the man said with a reassuring smile. "I'll walk you to the cutoff." They followed him off the trail. That was the last confirmed sighting of the Caldwell brothers. At first, nothing felt wrong. The unmarked route looked like what Mark had promised: faint, overgrown, but walkable. Broken branches and flattened grass suggested past use, just not recent maintenance. Ethan kept his eyes scanning, cataloging details the way training had taught him to do. 10 minutes in, the forest grew thicker. Cell service dropped completely. The temperature dipped. Sound changed. No birds, no wind, just the soft crunch of boots and the occasional scrape of branches. "You sure this reconnects?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his tone light. Mark didn't turn around. Another 5 minutes. 5 minutes became 10. The ground sloped downward now, steeper than expected, funneling them into a narrow basin. Ethan slowed. "We should stop," he said. "Check bearings." Mark stopped walking. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mark turned around. The warmth in his expression was gone, replaced by something disturbingly calm, almost peaceful. Ethan noticed the smell next. Chemical. Sharp. "You shouldn't have followed me," Mark said. Ethan barely had time to reach for Lucas before everything fractured, pain exploding behind his eyes, the forest tilting violently, the sound of Lucas shouting his name dissolving into nothing. When Ethan opened his eyes again, there was no sky. Only darkness. And the sound of chains moving somewhere close. Ethan woke to the smell of damp earth and metal. The darkness was absolute, the kind that erased depth and distance. When he tried to move, pain shot through his wrists. Rope. No, chains. Cold, tight, unforgiving. "Lucas!" His voice came out hoarse. A sharp inhale answered him, followed by a shaky whisper. "I'm here. I can't see." Memory returned in violent flashes. Mark's voice. The chemical sting. The forest spinning sideways. A lantern flared to life. The room revealed itself slowly, low ceiling reinforced with timber beams, dirt floor packed hard from years of use. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with water jugs, canned food, tools. This wasn't improvised. It was planned. Mark descended a short set of wooden steps like a man entering his own home. "You're safe now," he said calmly, setting down the lantern. "You just don't know it yet." Lucas began shaking, chains rattling as panic set in. "What do you want?" Ethan demanded. Mark smiled faintly. "To fix what the world broke." He spoke of cities as disease, of men losing their instincts, of the wilderness as purification. Ethan realized with sick clarity, this wasn't a kidnapping. It was a conversion. "You'll thank me eventually," Mark said, extinguishing the lantern. The darkness rushed back in. And somewhere above them, a door locked. Days passed without shape or number. Mark visited twice a day, always calm, always controlled. He brought food, measured portions of rice, beans, water poured carefully as if scarcity itself were sacred. He never rushed, never raised his voice. That, Ethan realized, was the point. "You need structure," Mark explained during one visit, crouching so they were eye level. "Out there, people rot because they're given too many choices." Lucas stopped responding after the first week. He ate when told, slept when exhaustion claimed him. His eyes followed Mark with empty compliance that terrified Ethan more than screaming would have. The man wasn't just imprisoning them, he was erasing them. Ethan learned fast. He nodded when Mark spoke, asked questions that sounded curious instead of defiant. He mirrored belief without committing to it. Mark liked that. He lingered longer, loosened Ethan's chains by inches. "See." Mark said once. "You're adapting. Stronger than your brother." The words felt deliberate, divisive. At night, Ethan whispered anyway. "Stay with me," he told Lucas in the dark. "Don't disappear." Somewhere behind a supply shelf, Ethan noticed carvings in the wood, tally marks. Names scratched deep, then crossed out. This wasn't Mark's first experiment, and no one before them had made it back. The storm arrived without warning. Even underground, the air shifted, heavy, electric, vibrating through the dirt walls. Thunder rolled so close it felt like it came from inside Ethan's chest. Water began seeping through the ceiling in thin, steady lines. Mark's routine shattered. He came down early that night, movements rushed, voice tight. "Weather's worse than forecast," he muttered, stacking supplies higher, dragging crates onto a raised platform. For the first time, fear flickered across his face. The lantern was left burning. Ethan noticed the mistake instantly. As rain turned into a roar, water flooded the chamber, ankle-deep, then higher. Mark shouted to himself, panicking now, scrambling to save journals and maps. He didn't look at them. Ethan moved. Weeks of quiet observation paid off. The chain bolt at his ankle, loosened grain by grain in the dark, finally tore free with a dull crack lost beneath thunder. He reached Lucas, fingers shaking, grabbed a pair of rusted cutters Mark had dropped. "No time," Ethan whispered. The chain snapped. Lucas stared at him like he was seeing a ghost. "Run." They hit the stairs as water surged behind them. Mark turned, realization snapping into rage. "You'll die out there," he screamed. But the forest swallowed the words. Lightning tore the sky open, and the brothers ran into the storm, barefoot, bleeding, and free. Freedom didn't feel like relief. It felt like chaos. The storm chased them through the forest for hours, rain slashing sideways, wind bending trees until branches snapped like gunshots. Ethan lost track of direction almost immediately. The darkness erased landmarks. The rain erased footprints. They ran until their lungs burned, until Lucas collapsed face-first into the mud. By morning, the storm moved on. What it left behind was worse. Endless forest in every direction. No trail. No sound of civilization. No idea which way they'd come from. The world felt too big now, just as terrifying as the bunker had been small. Days blurred together. Their feet shredded on rock and root. Hunger gnawed constantly. They drank from streams without hesitation, knowing dehydration would kill them faster than bacteria. Lucas weakened quickly. Fevers, confusion, long silences where his eyes glazed over. Ethan talked constantly, afraid of what silence meant. He argued with people who weren't there. Apologized to ghosts. Replayed the moment he followed Mark off the trail over and over like a punishment. When Lucas finally whispered, "We're not getting out," Ethan didn't argue. Because the forest had stopped feeling like an escape. It felt like a larger cage. And somewhere deep inside it, Ethan realized something far worse than being lost. They no longer trusted the world enough to be found. They found the tree by accident. Ethan nearly walked past it before Lucas collapsed against the trunk, sliding down with a sound that was more relief than pain. The tree was enormous, ancient, hollowed by time and rot, its base split open just enough for two bodies to fit inside. Dry. Hidden. Safe. That was all that mattered. They crawled into the hollow as night settled, curling together in the darkness like they had as children during power outages. For the first time since escaping, Ethan slept, deep and heavy, without dreams. They stayed. At first, it was meant to be temporary. Just one night. Then another. Then moving felt impossible. The outside world was loud, unpredictable, dangerous. Inside the tree, nothing changed. They left only to gather water from a nearby stream and whatever edible roots or berries Ethan recognized. Their bodies shrank. Clothes rotted away into filthy rags. Hair matted. Time dissolved. They heard people twice. Once, machinery in the distance. Another time, a voice calling out, male, echoing through the forest. Ethan froze. What if it was Mark? He pressed his hand over Lucas's mouth until the sound faded. Neither of them spoke afterward. Safety, they learned, meant invisibility. And the hollow tree became less like shelter, and more like a promise never to leave. The whispering started as a way to stay awake. Ethan didn't remember choosing it. One moment they were lying in the dark, listening to each other breathe, and the next he was saying Lucas's name under his breath. Over and over. A reminder. An anchor. Lucas. A pause. Ethan. They repeated it until the words lost meaning and became rhythm. Proof that they still existed. Proof that neither of them had slipped away in the night. Days, or weeks, passed like this. Their bodies wasted. Skin grayed beneath layers of dirt and ash from the hollow's decaying interior. Bones pressed sharply against skin. Hunger dulled into something distant and constant. Then one afternoon, the forest changed. Footsteps. Deliberate. Human. Ethan's heart slammed so hard he thought it might give them away. A voice followed, calm, unfamiliar, calling out into the trees. Search patterns. The kind of tone meant to sound reassuring. Lucas lifted his head, eyes wide with hope. Ethan panicked. Every instinct screamed danger. Another man. Another voice offering help. Another trap. He pulled Lucas close, shaking his head violently, whispering his name faster now. Lucas. 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 They stayed silent. The voice faded. The footsteps moved on. When it was over, Lucas didn't argue. He just whispered Ethan's name back, slower this time, softer. They had escaped captivity. But fear had taught them the final lesson. Rescue could be the most dangerous thing of all. The sound that changed everything was barely audible. A rhythmic whisper carried through the underbrush, so soft it blended with the forest itself. Caleb Morrison, a state forestry contractor surveying storm damage, stopped mid-step. The air was still. No wind. No animals. He followed the sound. The massive hollowed redwood stood like a monument to time, its base obscured by hanging moss. When Caleb knelt and looked inside, his breath caught. Two men huddled together in the darkness. They were skeletal, skin stretched thin over bone, hair long and matted, clothes reduced to rotting scraps. Their lips moved constantly, whispering names in perfect rhythm. Ethan. Lucas. Caleb spoke gently. You're safe. I'm here to help. They didn't react. When rescuers arrived, the brothers had to be separated carefully. Both screamed when pulled apart, clinging to each other with desperate strength. Only when their hands touched again did the whispering slow. The investigation unraveled quickly after that. Mark Halvorson was found 3 days later in a remote cabin, surrounded by journals, maps, and evidence of victims who never escaped. He confessed without emotion. Ethan and Lucas survived. But survival didn't mean recovery. Even now, years later, when the world grows too loud or trust feels dangerous, they still whisper each other's names in the dark. Proof they're real. Proof they made it out. What happened to Ethan and Lucas Caldwell forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about survival. Sometimes the hardest part isn't escaping captivity. It's trusting the world again once you do. They survived something most of us can't imagine. Manipulation disguised as help. Isolation disguised as safety. And a fear so deep it taught them to hide from the very people trying to save them. Their bodies were found in the wilderness, but their minds had already been shaped by it. Cases like this remind us that danger doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it speaks calmly. Sometimes it offers shortcuts. Sometimes it looks like someone who knows the way. And that's why these stories matter. Because the wilderness isn't always trees and mountains. Sometimes it's the choices we make, the people we trust, and the moment we decide whether to listen to our instincts or ignore them. If this story made you pause, if it made you question how easily trust can be used as a weapon, then take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. We tell these stories not just to remember what happened, but to recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and stay safe.